they can interrupt and make noise. So I'm going to start this. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind. I'm going to talk about what U Chicago has done in order to use the Folio users API. And it's actually, I should say, it's not entirely a users specifically API. It's actually a circulation API to renew items for users in bulk. This became necessary for us during lockdown when we didn't want people to, gather their books and come in and renew them. And we didn't want them to try to, we used to be able to have it through the OPAC, our online catalog, but the students will all be hammering their accounts all at the same time, and that would just cause the server to drop. So instead, and that would actually cause someone who worked for central IT to have to come in, which was of course something they didn't want to have happen. Instead, we went through this and it was so popular that we've just been doing it ever since on a quarterly basis for the quarterly borrowers and on an annual basis for our annual borrowers. So we found this API, and this is essentially the process. We run an SQL statement, typically against our MetaDB, to get a list of eligible patron and item barcode combinations. And in that case, the way it's written, all we really have to do is plug in a few dates. We replace a few dates, and then it will give us this combination. And we just export the results into a tab separated file. And then you edit the file to take out anything that is not a patron or item barcode. That new line at the end, take it out. Those headers at the end, at the beginning, take them out. And then, we run a Python script that reads each row, plugs in the patron data or the patron barcode and the item barcode into the API. And and they just renew. This is, for the quarterly records, it tends to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 45,000 loans, 45,000, unique combinations. And that takes about 3 or 4 hours. We do it when the library is closed and then there's not a lot of activity. And we won't bring circulation to its knees by running this, by running the renewal. The path is, your Folio org circulation, renew by barcode. And then, you add the user barcode, which is your patron barcode, and then the item barcode, which is the item barcode. That's it. So all you have to do is plug those 2 things in. The API is, every API is documented. This one is from GitHub. We've seen these. It's in the circulation realm. This is basically this is the entire API, at least the entire thing. Okay, so we use the SQL to generate the list of patron and item barcodes. Select the barcode. For those of you who do SQL, this makes all the sense in the world. We check the loan status. We have the loan due date, which is the one coming up. And then we have a patron expiration date, which is our next due date, our upcoming due date. So that so we're not renewing items for people whose accounts are about to expire. So yes, the significant part of the Python script is here, where you just sort of, you get the token, and then you just basically, you plug it in. There's this thing will, and then it also, because the resource access people wanted a list of every patron barcode, every item barcode, and what, if there was an error or not. And if there was an error, what kind of error? And so we just printed that out into a comma separated file. So our input file is a TSV file, and the output file is a CSV file that is, that has an identical name.
Okay. All right. And
Oh, is that it?
yeah,
Okay. Any questions about this or? Yeah.
So, the SQL script feels like there's a missing API at the beginning there. Is that something you've explored?
Right, the SQL script is running against MetaDB, which is a copy. And so again, we're not like, the MetaDB is not very far behind. So, we're pointing the SQL, we point most of our SQL sort of reporting, against MetaDB. And that way we're not, what we're likely to miss is that someone has renewed an item already by the time we run it. But we run, we run the SQL sort of after 5 or 6 that evening, so that most of the kids most of the patrons, they're all adults. Most of the patrons will have, returned or renewed their books. And then, this will be on the day when the due date changes, and so we have this, and we run this 3 times before we start sending out lost notices. So, we give them like a week, we renew the first set, 1 week, the next week, we run this SQL again to get the collection of patron item barcodes. And it's a much smaller number. We run the renewals again. And we will do it a 3rd time, which is a smaller number, but very close to the 2nd number. Because the people who didn't renew their books the first time have not, generally speaking, have not resolved their thing. And they're the people who have 100 books checked out. And so if one person clears up their account, then we knock 100 items out of the list. And so, and then after that,
So the other part, the manual intervention side, have you considered moving that into being codified to programmatic?
yes, we are at the moment looking at using a workflow engine like Airflow.
Okay.
So that all we have to do is set this up with the proper dates to generate the file, do the file, and run it through the Python script. Because the Python script really the only change, the name of the file. And then we're good to go. Yes.
How many users and how many valid user barcode combinations we talking about? For a quarterly loan, for quarterly loans, it tends to be about 45,000 individual records, individual lines on Persons or valid combinations?
valid combinations.
How many persons are in MetaDB and of all?
They're all in MetaDB. I'm not sure I'm understanding the question.
How many users are in the MetaDB at all?
Yes, yes, that's, that is, MetaDB is kept, updated. So it has exactly the number of users that we have in the system.
How many? Question.
Right.
Approximately.
To be honest, I actually don't know, because, we never actually let users go away.
Can you give that range?
Well,
10,000, 100,000?
well, I mean, this, if I said that there were, quarterly loans
I would guess to be, would be, if we're talking about 45,000 records, I would guess about 40,000 borrowers, but, that is really only a rough estimate, that is a guess. Did you have a question or did I?
yeah, have you considered moving the SQL request into the Python code? And just encapsulating it and not having anything between them and just streaming the data from
Yes.
SQL to?
Right, yes, that also makes a lot of sense. And, we looked at it this way, for a long time, the person who generated the file, did not work in Python, she worked in SQL. And so she would get me the file. Now I have this and it's all mine. What we might wind up being able to do is, use workflow to just be able to, just run these things in a sequence. And then, we can have this thing which works. And if the one thing I asked is that if somebody's going to alter the code, please make sure it still works. Yeah.
If you say it like this, do you have any tests for your code?
Do I have tests for the code? Yes, we have a test bed and, we use so I have, when I was developing the Python script, I would just run it against our test environment, just to make sure that it worked. I'm one of those testers who does like, okay, does this part work? Great. Does this part and this part work? Great. Does this part and this part and this part work? And so, people were very unhappy that I took so long, but darn it, it got done and it worked. Do you have a hand up?
Yeah, so, if you have those conditions where somebody's already reviewed it, what happens? Does it just set the date again or a different date?
It just says that the due date is on, basically. So it says that the due date is in the future and that there's no need to renew it. So, any other questions, or shall we go on to other things in the user's API?
All right, so I'll take over now. And I'm going to be talking about two specific use cases that I have at UMass Amherst. So maybe I should introduce myself first.
You want me to advance the slide?
Oh yeah, that would be great. All right, yes. So my name is Amelia Sutton. I'm the Library Services Platform Administrator at UMass Amherst, which is part of the 5 College Consortium. And I'm also the product owner for the Users app. And yeah, so there are 2 ways that we use the APIs for user management that I want to talk about today. And then I also have another session tomorrow that I'm going to plug, where I talk in more detail about the way that we manage our permissions for our student employees and for our staff. And that's using a script that connects with the API to allow us to manage user permissions in a single place. But I'll talk more about that tomorrow. So first off, whenever we have a system upgrade for Folio, we need to do UAT to make sure that things aren't broken and to make sure all of our data migrated to the upgraded instance. So part of that UAT is getting patron group counts for users in each patron group to make sure that we have the same number, because that gives us an idea that everything migrated as it should have. You graphs? Okay, so the way that I check this is I have a Python script that makes a request to this users API filtering on patron group. And so, and with a limit of 0. So in this case, this patron group, I can't remember what it was because it's the UID. This patron group comes back with and it must have been in a different environment because the numbers don't match up over there. But here in the response, you'll notice that there are no user records, because I set the limit to 0, but it will give you an accurate count of the number of records that match the query in that API request. So what my script does for a UAT is it essentially runs this query repeatedly in both our production environment and our dry run environment, and collects these numbers for each patron group and puts that all into a CSV, which I can use to quickly scan through and see the numbers should be roughly the same. There's a little bit of difference because our dry run environment's data gets pulled a few days before we actually begin the testing. So there are a few discrepancies. You can see these are a little off, but in general, as you've said, since we don't delete user records very often, the production number should always be larger than the dry run number. So yeah, that's how I use this endpoint. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about, go to the next slide, are notice messages. So email messages that get sent out by Folio. If you look in the cert log, you can see when a message was sent and which template it used, but you can't view the actual text of the message as it was when it was sent. So if we send out a fine email and then we change our template, you won't be able to see what the actual email that was sent to that patron on the day that the notice was sent out, because the template changed, and so you don't have that in the UI. There's no way to view that. However, with this email endpoint, which is just email, and then I have a query added on after this. So at this email endpoint, you can get the records of the emails as they were sent by Folio. So actually, if you go to the next slide quickly. So when you make a request to that endpoint, you get this big email entity that has a bunch of fields that are primarily really good for filtering. So we have 2, which is the user, or which is the email address that the message was sent to. The header is useful for finding the specific kind of message that was sent. And then the body contains the actual HTML of the email. And back,
Okay.
yes.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So why do we need this? This has only happened rarely, but it does come up when a patron disputes that they got an email from the system. We need to be able to produce that email and say, look, we know that it was sent. And on that record, actually, on the next slide, sorry. On this record, there is a status, and so that can tell you whether or not the message sent successfully. So that's what we use it for. And then when I send this over to our billing person, now go back, sorry. What I will do is I will take the body here and just copy everything out of it, put it in an HTML file, and then I can send this HTML file to our billing person, and it's in a human readable format that they can use in contacting our patron. Yeah, so those are the 2 specific cases that I wanted to talk about for this session. But I'd be happy to answer questions about other ways to use the user's API. These were 2 that I thought were worth highlighting. This one especially because there isn't a way to get to this information in the user interface. And the other one just because it's something that we run fairly frequently with all of our upgrades. So does anyone have any questions?
I was just gonna ask how long do you keep all the emails.
So the system stores them, and I don't think we delete them all the time.
Oh, so you don't run this all the time, you only run this when.
When it comes up, yeah, when we need to retrieve the email, it's usually, we use these specific filters on where to find the specific instance of an email being sent that we need. We don't usually save each of these to a database or anything like that.
I'm interested in the sorted truth for whether an email is sent or not. So is that a failure from Folio to send it? Or is it the mail server? Because in mail servers, things can go into the mail server and then end up in a deferred state. So if you speak on that.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure about that. I believe that that is whether it was successfully sent to the mail server, but
Okay.
I am not sure if that's the response from the mail server or not.
That'd be interesting. You get yourself into a place where the truth you have is saying one thing, but the actual truth.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you ever means to talk with people who look after your mail servers?
I think I would have to ask our hosting provider, because we're EBSCO hosting, so
Cool.
we need to talk with them about that. Yes.
Are there any privacy concerns with that API?
With this API, what do you?
Well, I mean, what was sent in that email might not be appropriate for somebody to read necessarily, somebody else to read that you're reading.
Well, so this email endpoint actually has its own permission requirement. And as far as I know, there is no visible permission for it. It is only an invisible permission. And so for making these requests, you do need to have an access token to get them. So they should be secured there.
The reason you ask for the email address instead of the user number?
So actually, could you go to the next slide where it has the whole thing? So on here, it doesn't actually have the user's information. This is just the information about the message that was sent, and so that doesn't include the user's UUID. It only includes the from and to addresses.
Amelia and Laura, I just got a text from Aaron that says whoever had the camera moved, it is just on Maura now.
Oh,
And
I
she's
think
like,
it's automatic.
The blur is on.
the slide.
The blur is on, so you guys keep coming in and out, but it's fine.
Okay.
Well, can you see the slide?
Yeah, are the slides being shared at least?
Yeah,
it shows it that's what matters. Yes, the slides are clear.
Okay.
Yeah, is that better? There we go.
That's a lot better. That's nice.
Okay, good. Excellent.
Okay.
All right.
Are there questions in the chat?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Should we move on?
No.
Okay.
Might have to. Here. Yeah, so this last bit that I have is our permissions management, and I can talk about that a little bit since it doesn't seem like we have many questions. So I'll talk a little bit about the reasoning for it, and then I can save the details about how it works for tomorrow. But in general, managing permissions for a large number of student workers can be really difficult, especially around the semester change when we're getting a lot of new students coming in and a lot of students whose permissions we need to remove. And so currently in the UI, the two ways that you can add or remove permissions from a user are in the users app, where you have to go to an individual user and go in and search for and add all of the individual permissions you want to add. Or in settings, where you can go to an individual permission set and add as many users as you would like to that permission set. But the way that we have permissions implemented, there isn't just a single student employee permission set, or even an ILL student permission set, or a circulation desk permission set. We have several permission sets that we assign to our student employees. And so going in for each of 100 student records that need to be updated and manually adding those permissions to each user for each permission set. Either way, doing it from users, you need to go to each user. Doing it for permission sets, you need to go to each permission set. Either way, it's a lot of manual work. And so the script that I have makes requests to the permissions user endpoint, which allows it to retrieve the current permissions that are assigned to a user. And then it follows that up with a request to update with whatever permissions that I have included in a CSV file. So I manage the permissions assigned in a CSV file where it's essentially laid out as UUIDs for users, followed by a series of columns with the individual permission names. And so what the script will do is it will go in for each user and check if the list of permissions that are assigned to that user match what it is in Folio. And if they don't, it will update the permissions assigned for that user. And then it does this for our whole list of 100 student employees. Any other questions from anyone? Other things that people think would maybe be good to use the APIs for that we didn't talk about that you'd like to maybe know more about the possibilities? Yes.
The possibility to create absolutely broken users via the APIs because you forget to create the corresponding permission user or the corresponding, what was the other one? I think there are 2 or 3 objects you do have to create in the background and link to them. And it's so easy to forget because it's not really that well documented that you need those in the user's API description at least.
Yeah, so for permissions, if you load users through the user load user import, if you use mod user import, it will automatically create those permission users. But I've noticed that it doesn't do that for service points, which doesn't come up as an issue for us too often. However, with my permission management script, it actually performs a similar function for service points. And in that, what I have to do is have it look for a record with that user's UUID. And if it doesn't find one, it will create one. So, yeah, sometimes you do have to check before making things like that. But in the UI, if you edit a user who does not have a service point record, it will create one. Yeah.
Also, a lovely mismatch between the user as described in the API, with the ID being described as string, and later on, at least for managing users, the ID being required to be UUID, because in the modified metadata object, there is a requirement for the user ID of the user changing things to be a UUID. So we do have there a rather big mismatch between the API and the reality, or at least between the API description and the reality. If you look into the code for the Postgres backend at least, you will see that, that there is that there are UUID checks in there that are not in the API description. So your backend will say, no, that's not a valid user, but your API will say, that's a valid user.
Yeah, we haven't run into that at all. And I wonder, so are you talking about direct access to the backend database? Or are you talking about like a reporting platform like?
I'm talking about just using the API. If you're doing it by the front end, you will create a proper UUID.
Mm-hmm.
But there in the examples, there are the old style examples with just, I think, just numbers and not a UUID format for the ID. And if you look at it though, for the metadata, those users wouldn't be valid users to change another user because there is a requirement of this to be a UUID as a UUID format.
So when you're creating these users that have these string UUIDs, are you providing the UUID to the system?
Yeah, that's how when you provide the UUID, exactly.
Okay, because if you're creating a new user, you don't need to provide the with the UUID.
I know, but
Yes.
technically you can, and
Yeah.
if you do so, because in the example.
Especially if you want to put them in the domain. You might
Yeah. Okay. That's worth fixing potentially. Yeah, I think.
But that will be a proper API change because it's officially not backwards compatible, and that's, I raised this issue in the development channel already. So sometimes someone's like, no, that's way too much work, and it's officially an incompatible API change.
Okay. Has anyone created a Jira ticket for that? Because I'd be interested in exploring that more.
I didn't create a Jira ticket for it, but maybe I could try to, or I can just show you later.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay. I don't know where we are.
Amelia,
Yes.
is there something that you are currently working on that you're excited about with regards to the API and users?
I don't think I have any new projects right now with users APIs. Oh, no.
Well, there's also a, when you saw the, let's see it, oh no, I'm not gonna touch the slides, but if you saw, there was a, when I showed the RAML for renew by barcode, they have another one for renew by ID, which means that, you know, individual people can, renew their items themselves. You know, and I say that because, you know, you could take that and plug it into an OPAC, and do a discovery layer, and then, you know, you can have someone, you know, they have their ID, it's there, you know, when you log in, their ID will be part of the record or their barcode will be, and then you can just, you know, plug it in.
But you would need to provide either a token in the in-between layer, or you would need to provide you would need the user to authenticate against Folio itself and get their own token. And I don't think we have permission management on that. So basically, the user could try to spoof another ID and renew an item for someone else technically from that point on, because of the missing vertical
Yes. Well,
permission management.
I remain hopeful. But, you know, been sort of, things like this, and I like being able to, you know, grab users by groups and things. But this is as far as we went, right? Yeah. Okay. So, are there any other questions or comments? The other possibility is that, you know, if you're feeling that it's a little warm in here or a little stuffy, we can also just say we went on this long and you know, get some fresh air. So, That's true, we can.
I create my own environment right now.
But, okay, so, now that you've seen, you know, what we've had to show you, I'm interested in knowing what interests you about the user's API. I mean, there was a point when, you know, I had a script written because when we discovered kind of the hard way that the user's user ID and the permissions user ID do not necessarily match. And, you know, I had written a script in Python to, you know, take a human readable ID, get the UUID for the user, and then use that to get the permissions ID for the same user. Yeah.
I would highly suggest that this should never happen, because it's a UUID after all, they should be all different. And this is something that should never be,
They should never be identical.
respond to each other.
Right, right. Yes. Yeah, no, there was one of our programmers expressed a great deal of frustration and wanted to create the users so that those two UUIDs matched. But when I said, oh, I wrote a Python script, then he said, oh, so you can do it. And then he decided to do it. So, you know, because it couldn't be that hard, I did it. So which again, that's a long history, because I used to be able to tell people when I did, you know, I was first line tech support initially. And so I would say, look, if I can do it, you can do it. And, you know, so anytime I would say it's super easy, you can tell because I can do it. And, you know, so this sunk in. So loads of people like, oh, so you did it. Okay. But yes, so yeah, is there any other point of interest, you know, because, yeah.
Have you thought about switching the script to be only API based and using the users and items API instead of an SQL query? That might be an overhead, but it might also just encapsulate your code as well.
It is a lot slower than that.
Yeah, sure.
It's a huge caching.
But on the other hand, you do have the rights already, the right on, I don't think it's that much of a time-wise difference if you do streaming.
Well, I mean, if we're punching that API over and over again for 45,000 records, you know, being run in.
But you can do batches of like 100 pretty safely, especially if you're using the slash user storage instead of slash users. You don't do batches of slash users because it talks to the slash user storage and it'll give an error if you batch.
Right.
Over about 25, like whereas batch user storage, you can concatenate user IDs with ANDs and go for much larger batches, and that will speed up those calls by quite a lot.
Right.
But they're still slower than that.
Yeah, sure.
Right, yeah, well, and we've also had, we've been burned by previous ILSs about running things, you know, against the same tables at the same time. And so, you know, in order to prevent that preemptive panic that happens sometimes when someone has been burned badly and doesn't want to deal with it, we'll just, you know, they'll say, no, we're getting this from the MetaDB. You don't have to worry. We're getting it from the MetaDB. We can all calm down.
There is an extra speed up you can do on the requests, and it's switching from requests on Python to G requests, because then you can make 5 or so concurrent calls at a time, and it will take an hour job down to 2 hours very easily. And you're still going at a rate that is throttled, so that you're not overtaxing your system like your original problems.
Right. Exactly. All right. Yeah.
question. When you load this, data and permissions data for your student assistants, you basically do it like 2 times a year or something like that? Or I haven't got any plans because we have requests right now, getting updates from Windows AD, for student assistants and, staff.
Hmm.
And that would require us to have script running, basically on the fly for every single time, records are added to a particular user root in Windows AD. And
So is this about setting up users, giving them permissions?
giving them, permission, yeah.
Yeah, so the way that we set up our permissions is fairly manual in that like I contact all of our student supervisors and they send me lists of users. So we don't have that level of automation. Yeah,
I can say something to that. We are working on something like this because we are using not AD, but different user providers, that are also used for our Shibboleth logins. And we are, currently working on a project with a split architecture with one big sinker and parts to connect to different user providers on the one side and the Folio on the other side, and try to basically the Hebus community is trying to create one tool to rule them all, or where you only have to change basically the left side library connecting to your local IDP, your local identity provider, and have the sync of the permission sets and the users into Folio on a shared basis. And we plan to open source it. I think the records are still under protection now because they are on local GitLab instances and so on. But we are working with this, and you probably could go the official way and contact us via the Hebus.
We'll do that.
Problem solved. All right, would there be any other questions or comments or?
And there's nothing in the chat, right?
No, the chat is painfully empty.
Just check.
Yeah. I'm sorry, online people. You're welcome, Aaron. Well, given that, I think that we can call it a session.
Yeah.